Moving to Live is a podcast about movement and exercise. We bring you interviews with professionals in the movement and exercise field. The goal is to provide information for other professionals and also amateur movement aficionados, people who understand that movement is part of what makes life complete. Some of the people we interview you will have heard of. They're well known in and outside of the movement and exercise profession. Others you may not have heard of, but they have a great deal of knowledge to share. Many people doing the best work spend their time working with people, not working on their social media presence. We're going to give you a chance to learn from some of these talented and knowledgeable individuals, and we're going to learn along with you. Moving to Live podcasts are going to be short. Each interview will be long enough to impart usable information, but short enough to be able to be consumed in a single bout, during your workout, commute, or even during dinner prep. We all like long-form interviews, but time is valuable. Moving to Live wants to give you the option to learn and be entertained without needing to commit 60 minutes at a time for an interview. Give Moving to Live a listen. Check out our sister podcast, FitLab PGH, which highlights people, businesses, events, and activities in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area that make movement a priority. Moving to Live would love to hear from you. Want to connect with us or have an idea for somebody you think we ought to interview? Drop us an email, mov2liv@gmail.com, or connect with us on Instagram and Twitter, both _mov2liv. We're excited to bring you these interviews, and we think you'll enjoy each and every one that we bring you. Welcome back to another Moving to Live podcast. As you heard in the intro, we are a podcast for movement and exercise professionals and amateur aficionados. If you like what you hear, give us a feedback on Apple iTunes, or actually known as Apple Podcasts now. Drop us an email. We'll have show notes for that, and give us an idea for guests or tell us what you like. Our whole ethos is movement, part of what makes your life complete. I think it's important to remember that movement is a lifestyle. It's not just an activity. And we're fortunate enough today to be talking to somebody who I suspect is going to have an interesting outlook. He's been in the business over 20 years. I'm kind of interested in talking to him because I know he's living right now at altitude. So that has a slightly different effect when you're working with athletes or just clients who are not athletes. I want to give a big thank you to Jenny Ploss, who recommended it. And our guest today is Ryan Whited. Ryan is the owner, operator, founder of Paragon Athletics in Flagstaff, Arizona, which I think, if I remember correctly, is about, 7,500 feet?
Just under.
Just under. So, Ryan, thank you for taking time to talking to Moving to Live.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So the first question I always like to ask people that I interview for Moving to Live before we find out a little bit about your story is, if you meet somebody in line in the grocery store, you're waiting to fly and you're wearing a Paragon Athletics shirt and they say, "So what do you do? What's your canned," and I don't mean canned in a bad way, but just your little 30, 40-second spiel, "This is what I do."
My elevator speech.
Exactly.
I don't have one. That's the worst part. So I usually just answer simply, I'm a trainer. Yeah. I work with people daily, from elite athletes to people that are working through sort of musculoskeletal niggles. And it's a spectrum of folks that I work with now. So it'd be correct to say your main job is you want to make people move better. Yes. Well, I steer away from better nowadays, and I move, just generally move. The elite athletes move better. Anybody else just move. Yes. Yeah. So what I find always interesting is finding out where people started from. So you're in Flagstaff right now, and I know because I've got the little cheat sheet bio you fill out beforehand, and I can surf the internet and look at your website, and I know you're in Flagstaff. Where did you start out? Are you a Flagstaff native, or did you start out someplace else? No, I am from Arkansas originally, Hot Springs, Arkansas. I come from a rural area of Hot Springs, and then I made my way out to Flagstaff. And I'm curious because if somebody is 20 plus years in the fitness business, they clearly have to enjoy moving. It's not like you want to stand there and just tell people what to do. You want to move. So growing up, were you an active kid? And if you were active, was it because your parents and your family were active, or was it more because mom and dad said, get the heck out of the house and move around and don't come back till dinner time?
A bit of all. So my dad was a professional athlete.
And I saw that. I'm curious, what sport was it or what activity?
He was a racehorse jockey. He rode for over 30 years. He's a Hall of Famer because he's won a lot of races. He was very successful at that. I think the average career span for being a jockey is like 9 months.
There's a very high injury rate, if I remember correctly.
Yes. Yeah. I've had people come to pick me up at friends' houses and from school, from the hospital again on multiple occasions. So, yes. And then myself, I've been an athlete my whole life.
So what was your sport or sports of choice growing up?
Well, I'm from Arkansas, so football. Every kid was expected to play football. But funny enough, I never had a huge heart for it. Even for team sports, it just wasn't my thing. So I loved the camaraderie of it, all my teammates, but it just never got to me. I was our starting tailback for years, and I was a gifted athlete, in most respects. So I was fast, but it never had my heart, so to speak.
So I'm always curious, when you start out, at some point people realize I'm not going to do this at the next level, either because they're not good enough or they don't have their heart in it. At what point did you decide, football is not for me, I want to give something else up? I want to give something else a try. I don't want to do football anymore.
It was probably my 10th grade. No, it was probably my 11th grade year, high school, that I just realized it wasn't what I was into. I was actually at that time kind of into art and philosophy. So, and I started realizing that I like to spend a lot of time outside. And I loved training. Even then I loved training. And if you're a kid in the South, typically, how to work hard if you are on a team sport. And so I loved pushing myself. So I ended up building a little gym for myself after I left football. And I made gymnastics rings and rope ladders and all these things. And so that was how I started fulfilling my athleticism outside of football and track and other team sports.
You graduate from high school. What's the next step?
My curiosity for philosophy kind of continued, but I had discovered climbing and through backpacking.
For those of us who are not familiar with Arkansas, is there good climbing in Arkansas?
There's a lot of good climbing in Arkansas. And funny enough, so before I stopped playing football, I went to these athletic camps for a month each summer. At that camp was the first time that I climbed. And they asked if anybody would be interested in, after we had all repelled, if anybody would be interested in trying to climb back up. And it was me and one of the volunteers were the ones that decided to try it. So out of a couple hundred people, and it wasn't until probably several years later that I got a chance to do it again. But I continued to experience outdoors in an athletic way with backpacking and things of that nature. In Arkansas, at that time, there weren't many climbers. So there was a lot of climbing to be done, but there were not many climbers. And climbing as a sport now has exploded, as we know.
I forget who I was talking to, but I know in the mid-90s, the big sport was kayaking, and everybody wanted to whitewater kayak. And I think probably in the last 3 or 4 years, maybe even a little bit longer, climbing has taken out over to be the sport. It goes kayaking, and then it goes mountain biking, and then maybe it goes road biking, which it did in the Lance Armstrong era, and then it goes climbing. And there's always going to be those people who do it. Doesn't matter. You're going to be the old school climber, the guy who shows up in your Gramercy pants and your old pair of climbing shoes, and all the young guns who have all the fancy toys are going to go, how does he do that?
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's everybody finding their activities. So you decided that climbing, or you discovered the climbing was the thing. How did you pursue the philosophy interest after high school?
So I ended up moving to Switzerland for a short time. Where
the climbing is excellent, I understand.
It is. But my philosophy was kind of what I wanted to pursue for that time. So I actually went to a commune for a little while and studied Nietzsche and all the classics. And then I did climb a bit, and then I ended up going to France after that and climbed for a little bit long, and then came back to the States. And what was my next step after that? I think it wasn't too long after that I started looking west in the U.S. So, yeah.
So you get back to the U.S. Did you ever go to school officially? I know your bio says you took I think I may be paraphrasing, an atypical path. Is that the correct term that you used? Non-traditional.
It is. So when I moved to Flagstaff, they did have a physical therapy program here. And so that was one of the things that was in the back of my head. And I thought, well, there's incredible climbing in Flagstaff, and the culture suits me. And I thought, maybe if I do go back to school, I'll go the route of physical therapy. And that never really played out. So I am not very good at school. I'm very good at learning, is what I've discovered.
I'm curious then, would it be correct to say, and I don't mean this in a negative way, I've used this term in a FitLab Pittsburgh podcast, when you made the trek to Flagstaff, did you start out as what the people would call a dirt bag?
Yes. Yeah. I don't take offense to that at all. So we have a VW van. We actually lived in it for a while. So yeah.
And for listeners who are listening to this and they're going, well, wait a second, Ben just called Ryan a dirtbag. If you could just kind of give your definition of what a dirtbag is.
Somebody that's willing to live with less to do more. Sometimes there's truly dirtbags.
So you make it to Flagstaff. You do all kinds of climbing. I know I've been in Flagstaff and done some mountain biking and trail running. How big a cultural transition was it to go from Arkansas, small town Arkansas, to Flagstaff?
In some regards, or in most regards, the West just sort of suits me. It fits me better than the South did. Even though I absolutely love the South, I'm always telling our little boy where everything awesome comes from Arkansas. But the West suits me, and it always has. I remember when I was 16, I had read in Backpacker about the San Juans, and at that time I didn't have a car, so I borrowed my dad's truck and went to the western slope of Colorado and was like, well, I'm going to go climb. So I climbed some hills and some other peaks around that area, and I don't know if you're familiar with the San Juans, but
I am. I've got a good friend who lives in Salida.
Yeah. So, and I felt at home, even that early.
And I know, having spent some time in the South, I was in Atlanta and I was in Auburn for a few years. If you're somebody who moves on a regular basis, you're not exactly considered typical or normal unless it involves moving towards the football stadium.
Yeah, exactly.
And I know the attitude out west is, you may be a climber, but you probably dabble in mountain biking, trail running, whitewater kayaking, snow skiing, etc.
Yeah.
So
when I started climbing in Arkansas, I was still kind of for climbing, I was a little bit big. So I started running and riding a bike quite a lot, and people would ask me in Arkansas all the time if I needed a ride So they just thought, oh, that poor kid, he needs a ride.
You end up, whoops, I'm sorry. Go ahead. You end up in Flagstaff. You're a dirtbag. Clearly, you're not a dirtbag now. You're a business owner. So how did you go from dirtbag climber to business owner? What was the first step for doing that?
Man, this is a long process. So everywhere we went, I worked in a couple box gyms back when I was like 21 to 23.
And again, for some listeners who aren't really familiar, by box, you're not referring to CrossFit, but just big, large gyms that maybe have names that you heard of or names that cease to exist, but large numbers of members. The idea is you want to sell as many members on membership as you can.
Yes. And it was so, even then, that early on in my career, it felt, it went against what my heart was for the people that I was supposed to be trying to help. So because I just put them on these little machines, and this is if this is somebody's way of practicing, it's fine with me. But it just didn't suit what I had in mind for helping people. So I traveled quite a lot, as you probably picked up now, and then everywhere we would go, I ended up with like a few people training with me. Even if like we built a little gym up in the mountains in the Sierras, had a little gym when I was in Switzerland. And then when I finally landed in Flagstaff, it was in a basement. One, it was in a carriage house. So, and then I ended up with a job teaching health and wellness at a school here in town, which was a really fulfilling job because I got to direct these kids that, in how to move and have fun doing those things, So it was incredibly fulfilling. And then my wife decided that she wanted to go back to school. So we had good jobs, and I said, we might as well just go back to school. It's good. And I'll keep working. And so we made that decision. She quit her job, went back to school. And then about probably 6 or 8 weeks later, I was let go of my job. Former employee came back to work. And we had just bought a house. So we had just bought a house. And I thought, wow, this seems like this could become critical. Yeah. And so we had a couple house payments on credit cards. We found this incredibly large box of powdered milk. And we were living on that a little bit. And my wife was making bread, and because we couldn't buy bread, and then her student loans came in. And we decided, we were like, you know what? This is what we should do to ensure our financial security. Let's go rent a warehouse and start a business. So that's what we did.
Was the idea it was going to be a fitness business, or?
It was Paragon.
It was Paragon.
We have right now. We started with those student loans.
So we're gonna come back in a few minutes and talk about that a little bit more, but I want to ask a couple of movement related questions because it gives me ideas for future adventures. So my two favorite questions I always ask is, number one, for you, if you're sitting around the campfire, you're sitting at the microbrewery and you're talking about events or activities or climbing trips or something that you've done in the past that's just like, that's your favorite thing. What's the most favorite or most interesting movement activity you've done in the past? And would you do it again?
Other than climbing?
Other than climbing. Because I know anybody who's involved in a specific sport hardcore for many years is like, well, I do this. But they often have something else at the back of their mind. It's like, I'd kind of like to do this, or I did this and it was a lot of fun.
I do like to do like random challenges for myself, but those are always different. So I can't say like running, just from the house, unprepared, things like that. I kind of do ridiculous things. But honestly, like my daily or my weekly training is one of my favorite things that I do. And everybody knows we got back from a climbing trip last year, and we got in very late. It was a very long day of travel, or 2 days of travel. And I dropped my wife and son off at the house and told her I was headed into the gym, and she was like, "Are you crazy?" So as lame as that sounds, training is literally one of my favorite things.
Any movement activity that's kind of on the list? I need to get to it. I haven't got to it yet, but I know I'm going to do this.
So the goals, my goals typically lie in the climbing world. And because our business and our lives have been so busy, that's definitely been on the back burner for a while. But anytime I get free time, and my goals tend to gravitate toward climbing.
We just finished listening to, I guess 2 days ago, Joe Rogan interview Alex Honnold. Yeah. It's really, I'm not a climber, but it was really interesting. And I was surprised he was not as crazy as you would think he is when you see him do some of the free climbing.
Right. No, he comes off as just a very level-headed guy. Yeah.
So we are talking to Ryan Whitehead. He is the owner of Paragon Athletics in Flagstaff, Arizona. He just finished telling us about how he and his wife decided to open Paragon essentially on a box of powdered milk and some student loans. And what we're going to do is we're going to come back in 2 weeks, and we're going to find out more exactly about what Paragon does from hearing Ryan talk for the last few minutes. I suspect it's not at all like those big box gyms that he started out his movement career in. So Ryan, I want to thank you for part one, talking to Moving to Live, and I'm looking forward to catching up with you in 2 weeks.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the latest episode of Moving to Live. Make sure you check out the show notes for contact information for our latest guest, as well as links about all the things we talked about. Intro and exit music is Traveling Light by Jason Shaw. You can subscribe to Moving to Live on Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and Google Play, and be notified about new episode releases. Have any questions, comments, or suggestions? Drop us an email, mov2liv@gmail.com. Connect with us on Twitter or Instagram, both _MOV2LIV. Please tell your friends about Moving to Live. It's a go-to place for information for movement and exercise professionals and amateur aficionados who understand that movement is part of what makes your life complete. Until next week, keep on moving.